For most of human history, power was simple. It was taken by force and held by blood. Kings, emperors, and pharaohs ruled by divine right. Their word was law. But then, in the bustling city of Athens, a radical new idea was born. What if the people, the ordinary, everyday citizens, were the ones in charge? In this episode of the Human Odyssey, we trace the dramatic, often bloody life story of democracy. We'll stand on the Pnyx hill with the first citizens who ever voted. We'll see the idea fall, lost for 1,000 years in the darkness of empire and monarchy. We'll witness its explosive rebirth in the fires of the American and French revolutions, and we'll follow the long, arduous fight to expand the meaning of we, the people, to include all races and genders. This is a story of an idea that has toppled empires and freed nations, but one that remains eternally fragile. It's a story about the ongoing, unfinished, and essential struggle for control over our own destiny. I'm Danny, and this is a new episode from the Human Odyssey series. Our story begins not with a crown or a scepter, but with a conversation and a complaint. For most of human history, the architecture of power was brutally simple. It was a pyramid. At the very top sat a king, a pharaoh, an emperor, a man. It was always a man who ruled because a god had willed it, or because his father had ruled before him, or simply because his army was the strongest. His word was the weather. It could bring sunshine or storms, life or death. Below him were the priests and nobles, the generals and aristocrats. And at the very bottom, forming the vast, crushed base of the pyramid, was everyone else. The farmers, the merchants, the craftsmen, the soldiers, the slaves. Their job was not to speak, but to obey. Their fate was not their own. This was the default setting for humanity. It was the great, seemingly eternal quiet of command and control. For thousands of years, it was the only story we told ourselves about power. To question it was like questioning the rising of the sun. It was just the way things were. But then, in a small, sun-drenched corner of the world on a rocky peninsula jutting into the Aegean Sea, the quiet was broken. A new story began. Let's imagine a man. Let's call him Lycomedes. He's a potter in Athens, around the year 510 BC. His hands are perpetually stained with clay. His back aches from the wheel. His life is governed by forces far beyond his control. The city is ruled by wealthy, aristocratic families who rig the laws in their favor, or by tyrants who seize power and rule through fear. For Lycomedes, the government is something that happens to him. It's a distant storm that can ruin his business with a new tax or send his sons to die in a pointless war. He has no say. His opinion is worth less than the dust on his sandals. But something is stirring in Athens. The city is a hub of trade and talk. In the central marketplace, the agora, men like Lycomedes gather not just to sell their wares, but to argue. They argue about the price of olives, the quality of a neighbor's wine, the news from a distant port, and they begin to argue about power. Why should one family have the right to rule forever? Why should one man's whim decide the fate of all? An aristocrat named Cleisthenes, himself from a powerful family, sees the growing unrest. Perhaps out of a genuine belief in a new way, or perhaps as a clever move to outmaneuver his rivals, he proposes something that, to the rest of the world, sounds like pure madness. He suggests that the power should not belong to the nobles or the tyrants. It should belong to the demos, the people. All of them. Or at least all of the male citizens. Lycomedes the potter, Philion the shipwright, Demetrius the farmer, their voices, Cleisthenes argues, should be the ones that matter. Imagine the shock. Imagine Lycomedes hearing this news in the Agora. Him? A potter? To have a say in whether Athens goes to war? To help write the laws? It's a terrifying, exhilarating, unbelievable idea. The other aristocrats are outraged. This is chaos. This is turning the world upside down. But it's too late. The idea is loose. And so the experiment begins. It is called Demokratia, ruled by the people. It is messy, loud, and inefficient. The center of this new world is a dusty, sloping hill called the Pnyx. Here, thousands of citizens, farmers who walked for hours from their fields, merchants who closed their shops for the day, potters like Lycomedes, gather to form the assembly. They debate everything. Should they build a new fleet of warships? Should they raise taxes? Should they banish a politician who has grown too powerful? There are no professional politicians, no representatives. This is direct democracy. You show up, you listen to the arguments, and you raise your hand. A simple majority of the hands in the air decides the fate of the city. To fill government posts, they don't hold elections, which they feared would favor the rich and famous. They use a lottery. A machine called a cleriterion, a slab of stone with slots for tokens, randomly selects citizens to serve as magistrates, jurors, even members of the city's council. It is a radical act of trust, a declaration that every citizen is capable of governing. This fragile idea, born in the noise of the Athenian agora, proves to be astonishingly powerful. This new sense of ownership, this belief that the city belongs to them, unleashes a torrent of creative energy. The Athenians, empowered by their own voices, fight with ferocious courage to defend their city from the mighty Persian Empire, twice defeating an invading force that should have crushed them. In the decades that follow, Athens enters its golden age. It becomes a beacon of philosophy, drama, art, and architecture. The Parthenon, a temple to the goddess of wisdom, is also a monument to the confidence of a city that dared to rule itself. But the experiment is flawed, and the idea is fragile. The people in Athens means only adult male citizens. Women, slaves, and foreigners, the majority of the population, are excluded. And the wisdom of the crowd can curdle into the madness of the mob. The same assembly that championed freedom can be swayed by a charismatic, fear-mongering demagogue. They make disastrous decisions in a long and ruinous war with Sparta. And in their most infamous act, they vote to execute their city's wisest and most challenging citizen, the philosopher Socrates, for the crime of asking too many uncomfortable questions. Democracy in Athens lasts for less than 200 years before it is extinguished by the conquering armies of Macedonia. The great experiment is over. The quiet of command and control returns. The idea, it seems, was a beautiful, fleeting dream. For the next 1,000 years, the story of democracy is a story of silence. The idea is not entirely gone, but it sleeps, a ghost in the libraries of forgotten philosophers. The Romans create a republic, a system that gives some power to the people through assemblies and elected officials called tribunes. But it is a government dominated by a wealthy, aristocratic senate. It is a system designed to prevent the rise of a king, but also to keep the pure, chaotic democracy of Athens at bay. For centuries, the Roman Republic thrives, conquering the Mediterranean world, but its success is its undoing. The vast wealth flowing into Rome creates staggering inequality. Powerful generals build private armies loyal only to them. The Republic tears itself apart in civil war, and from the ashes rises an emperor. The Roman people trade their messy, contentious liberty for the peace and stability of a dictator. After Rome falls, Europe splinters into 1,000 warring fiefdoms. The pyramid of power is rebuilt stronger than ever. Kings, feudal lords, and the Catholic Church hold absolute authority. To suggest that a common peasant should have a say in his own governance is not just madness, it is heresy. For centuries, the idea of democracy is a lost artifact, a footnote in the history of a failed Greek city. But an idea, once born, can never be truly killed. It can only sleep. And in the 14th and 15th centuries, in the bustling, independent city-states of Renaissance Italy, something begins to stir. Scholars unearth the lost texts of the ancient Greeks and Romans. They read about the Athenian assembly, about the Roman Senate, about the radical notion of a government of citizens. Then a technological revolution fans the embers into a flame. The invention of the printing press shatters the monopoly on information held by the church and the state. Ideas can now travel faster and farther than any army. And a new, dangerous idea begins to spread. The idea of the individual. The belief that each person has inherent worth, reason, and rights. In England, a series of bloody civil wars leads to a king being put on trial and executed by his own parliament. A philosopher named John Locke writes that governments are not ordained by God, but are created by the consent of the governed. He argues that all people possess natural rights, the right to life, liberty, and property. And if a government violates those rights, the people have the right to overthrow it. Across the English Channel, in France, thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau declare that man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. The source of all political authority, they argue, is not a king, but the general will of the people. These are not just philosophical musings. These are intellectual dynamite, stacked at the foundations of the old world. All that is needed is a spark. And that spark comes from an unlikely place, a collection of unruly colonies on the far side of the Atlantic Ocean. The American colonists are, by and large, a quarrelsome and independent lot. They have grown accustomed to managing their own affairs. When a distant king and parliament in London try to impose taxes on them without their consent, they don't just complain, they reach for the dangerous ideas of the Enlightenment. They declare that they are not just subjects of a crown, they are a people endowed with inalienable rights. The American Revolution is the second birth of democracy. But the men who led it, Jefferson, Madison, Washington, are students of history. They have read about the glories of Athens, but they have also read about its failures. They are terrified of the mob, of the tyranny of the majority. They want a government of the people, but they want one with guardrails. So they create something new, not a direct democracy, but a representative republic. The people would not rule directly, but through elected officials. They create a constitution, a written rule book for power, to be placed above any single person or faction. They divide power between three branches of government: the president, Congress, and the courts, creating a system of checks and balances designed to prevent any one part from becoming too powerful. It is a brilliant, audacious design, but it is born with a profound hypocritical flaw. The man who writes the soaring words, "All men are created equal," owns over 100 human beings. The new American democracy is a democracy for white, property-owning men only. The original sin of slavery is woven into the fabric of this new nation, a poison that will nearly destroy it. The idea of democracy has been reborn, but the fight over the meaning of the people has just begun. Just as the ink is dying on the American Constitution, the idea explodes in its most violent and radical form back in Europe. In France, the people rise up against a bankrupt and decadent monarchy. The revolution is not a careful, deliberative process. It is a hurricane. They storm the Bastille, execute their king and queen, and declare a new age of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The French Revolution is democracy in a fever dream. It sweeps away 1,000 years of feudal privilege in a matter of months. But the dream becomes a nightmare. The quest for a perfectly virtuous republic descends into the reign of terror, where paranoia reigns and the guillotine becomes the symbol of the new state. The revolution, in its fury, begins to devour its own children. Out of the chaos, a general named Napoleon Bonaparte rises to become an emperor, promising order and stability. Once again, a fearful people trade their freedom for a dictator. The 19th and 20th centuries become a global battlefield for this powerful, dangerous idea. The story is no longer about whether the people can rule, but about who exactly counts as the people. The battle lines are drawn everywhere. In the United States, a brutal civil war is fought to end the hypocrisy of slavery and to decide whether the nation will be a true republic or a slave-holding aristocracy. The war is won, but the struggle for racial equality continues for another century. Across the world, women who had been excluded from the political conversation since the beginning begin to organize and demand a voice. They are mocked, arrested, and beaten, but they refuse to be silenced. The suffragettes marching and protesting for the right to vote are the new revolutionaries pushing the boundaries of democracy. Industrial workers toiling in horrific conditions in the new factories of the modern age form unions and demand not just better wages, but political power. They challenge the idea that democracy should be the domain of the wealthy and the powerful. With each struggle, the pyramid of power is flattened just a little more. The definition of we the people is stretched, slowly, painfully, to become more inclusive. But just as democracy seems to be expanding, it faces its most formidable enemies yet. In the early 20th century, two new rival stories about power emerge, promising a shortcut to a perfect future. In Russia, communism promises a worker's paradise, but delivers a totalitarian state where the party is absolute and the individual is nothing. In Italy and Germany, fascism celebrates the nation, the race, and the charismatic leader, openly scorning democracy as weak, decadent, and inefficient. The Second World War is a global showdown between these competing ideas. On one side are the totalitarian powers who believe that the state is everything and the people are merely instruments. On the other are the democracies, flawed and messy as they are, fighting for the principle that government should be the servant of the people, not their master. Democracy survives, but the struggle is not over. For the next 50 years, the Cold War divides the world into two camps, a long, tense standoff between the democratic West and the communist East. Then in 1989, the story takes a stunning turn. The Berlin Wall, the stark concrete symbol of the division, comes down. The Soviet Union collapses. All across Eastern Europe, people who have lived their entire lives under dictatorship pour into the streets demanding the right to choose their own leaders. It feels like the end of history. It feels like the conversation that began in Athens has finally been won. The idea of democracy, it seems, is triumphant. But stories like this never truly end. An idea as powerful as democracy is never safe. It is not a monument to be admired, but a garden to be tended. And in the 21st century, the garden is showing signs of neglect. The idea is now facing a new set of enemies. Enemies that are more subtle than kings or dictators. Misinformation spread at the speed of light on social media erodes the shared reality needed for public debate. Political polarization divides citizens into warring tribes, unable to speak to one another. Staggering economic inequality makes many feel that the system is rigged, that their voices no longer matter. In countries around the world, including some of the oldest democracies, authoritarian leaders rise to power by exploiting fear and promising simple solutions to complex problems. Cynicism, the belief that nothing can ever change, becomes democracy's most insidious poison. Our story began with a conversation in the Athenian marketplace. It was a conversation about who should have power. The conversation has never stopped. It has echoed through revolutions, civil wars, and protest movements for 2.5 millennia. It is the central, ongoing, and unfinished story of our political lives. Democracy is the belief that a collection of ordinary, flawed, and often disagreeing individuals can somehow, together, chart a wiser course than any single king or dictator. It is a bet placed on the collective wisdom and decency of us all. It is the most audacious, difficult, and noble political experiment in human history. It is an idea that is never finally won, but must be renewed with every generation. The pyramid of power is a constant threat, always seeking to rebuild itself. The quiet of command is always waiting to return. The story of democracy is not a history lesson. It is a living, breathing thing, and its next chapter has not yet been written. We are the ones who will write it. And with that, my friends, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from the Human Odyssey series. Don't forget to come back for more and for the other episodes that we have in this podcast. And don't forget to visit our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com, for more. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you again next time.